Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Immersive Tech Talk Podcast series presented by VRD HealthTech. I'm Sherry Marion, CEO of VRD HealthTech, and we're so pleased to have our host, Professor Skip Rizzo, who will be engaging in dialogue with various experts in the digital mental health field across the course of the podcast series. Professor Rizzo will interview today's amazing guest, Taylor Freeman of Axon Park. Before we start the discussion, though, let me introduce you to VRD HealthTech. VRD HealthTech is an accelerator for the adoption of immersive technology by partnering with emerging application creators to market, sell, onboard, and train users in health and wellness solutions. We offer these applications to hospitals, clinics, educators, and corporations to benefit their patients, students, clients, and their community. VRD is proud to have the support and guidance from experts in virtual reality, such as our host, Professor Skip Rizzo. Skip Rizzo is a professor at USC and director of medical virtual reality. He serves as an advisor and chief science officer for our partner, Cognitive Leap, exploring methods to address attention hyperactivity disorder, ADHD, in children. Joining Dr. Rizzo today is Taylor Freeman. Taylor Freeman is the co-founder of Axon Park, an innovative 3D learning platform that uses immersive experiences and AI to provide interactive, personalized education. With over a decade of experience in VR and education, Taylor led the first remote VR class at MIT and is a regular lecturer at universities such as Harvard, UCLA, and others. He founded 2 incubation spaces that have supported more than 150 AR and AI startups. And he built a VR-focused media platform that now reaches millions of people each month. Recognized in Forbes 30 Under 30, Taylor is also a board member for 2 XR nonprofits, where he works to make immersive learning more accessible and empower students to reach their full potential. During the interview, our participants who are joining us from the webinar can directly ask a question through the Q&A window, while participants from the YouTube live stream can also ask questions in the live chat. We'll have around 10 minutes at the end of the session to ask your questions. So now let's go ahead and turn it over to Skip and Taylor.
Okay, Taylor, good to hang out with you. How's the weather in Malta right now?
It is quite dark outside. It's actually 8 p.m. over here, but beautiful. This time of year is actually the best coming into early October. But yeah, thank you so much for hosting me today.
Yeah, well, you may have to host me for a visit one of these days. I might be at your door knocking. Malta's on my bucket list, so definitely we'll have to hang out. So we met in the mid-teens, 2014, 15, maybe you're a little bit earlier at SIGGRAPH and so on. And you impressed me in the very beginning of this next generation era after the standalone headset started to come on board with the Samsung Gear VR, and then the Oculus Rift was just about to be released and so on. And you really dug in and impressed me during a time when a lot of people were getting interested in VR. Some of them just learning about it recently during that time. But you had an impressive attitude about it. I think it was always about implementation, from what I recall from when we had first talked, and I believe it was in Marina del Rey. So what got you started? What was give us a little bit of your history about what got you interested in VR and how it led to where you are now.
Yeah, and I definitely remember meeting you in the early days, like the legendary Dr. Skip Rizzo. That was it was a fun moment. But I got into VR in 2014 following basically the acquisition of Oculus by Facebook. And so there was the Kickstarter that had happened. And when the big acquisition happened, it really became a huge thing around San Francisco. And at that time, I was working in digital media marketing and had a small agency that was doing those things. And my co-founder at that agency and I decided to just set up a meetup, hoping that meetup would message the right people about virtual reality who would be interested. And we basically said, look, we have the office, we'll provide some snacks and drinks. Just please bring a headset if you have one, show off what you're working on. And we actually had an amazing group just randomly turn up, really thanks to Meetup doing the promotion. And when I tried VR for the first time there, that was my first VR experience. It just brought tears to my eyes in terms of what it will do for giving people new perspectives, giving them new experiences, and how that will shape the future of society in such a profound way. And for me specifically, the way that we can learn and the way that we can experience things that otherwise would be impossible or nearly impossible to experience. So that's really how it happened. And then, since then, that was over 10 years ago now, I haven't looked back since. Still totally on the red pill all the way.
Yeah, that era was really fascinating for me because I had worked in the field for a number of years, and all of a sudden there was this renaissance that occurred. There were meetups all over, VRLA. I was blown away when I went to that there was literally hundreds and hundreds of people that had just learned about VR, and there was a giant exhibition space, and companies that I didn't even know of were sprouting up and demoing products and everything. And it was really it drove me in 2017 to write a paper called Is Clinical VR Ready for Prime Time? And I really was, I was very bullish. Like, we're here, you go to these events, there's hundreds of people, there's a lot of interest. We're finally getting there. And then it kind of slowed down a little bit, but not really. It's been a gradual, incremental growth cycle, I think. And you've been a part of it. So what, from that very early immersion in VR. What was the path where, with Axon Park, not to be confused with Axon, the police simulation company, but tell us a little bit about Axon Park and what your mission is and how, in the 10 years, how you got here.
Yeah, I think it was fairly organic moving into the education space. As I mentioned, when I tried VR, I really had this profound sense of where this will take humanity at a societal level and how much power it truly has. And then just through my time in the industry, hosting a ton of events, traveling around to different conferences, meeting people, learning as much as I could, it just became so clear that education was going to be completely transformed by this technology long term. And that vision was just really inspiring to me. And so I started the mission in education by actually teaching Unity development. So we put together some intro to Unity courses. We put together some of the first boot camps that were, the classic 3-month long immersion boot camps where you come and you learn Unity. And through that process, we started to experiment with using the medium itself to teach. So I recall, there were a few modules that were really fun. For example, teaching about locomotion. So we'd build a simulator where you could have a little menu, kind of like tilt brush, and you could select flying, and you could do the flying locomotion, or you could do teleport or running, etc. And we sort of integrated a lot of these user experience type modules, UI, world building, etc. But then we started to see that within these courses, vector math was the thing that people were struggling with the most. And for the developers out there, that that's very important for game development. And so basically the rough metrics from the class were roughly an hour-long training session and a 60% completion rate between the cohorts. And we said, okay, how can we utilize VR? This is a spatial idea, vector math, XYZ coordinates. How do we teach vector addition, subtraction, multiplication, etc.? And so we built a module, rapid prototyped it, had an amazing team that was just rapid prototyping these modules. And we deployed it to the first cohort, and we saw the longest session take 25 minutes. So again, from an hour down to 25 minutes, and 100% pass rate on the same test. And so witnessing that firsthand, it's undeniable, the power. And, those results, unfortunately, I don't think we had 100% pass rate in every cohort going forward with the VR module, but it was a profound shift in terms of the results. And so when I saw that, it was really that firsthand experience of, this is really transformative. This is really going to change the game. And started really leaning into that, did some of these remote training classes where, I'd be across the country from the students and we'd meet in a virtual space. Back in the day, it was High Fidelity from Philip Rosedale, and, in our funny little avatars, and going through that experience. And then in about 2019, when we saw the standalone headsets start to hit the market, the original Quest, for example. Oh, hello, buddy.
Yeah, my cat wants to join the podcast.
There you go, special guest. So yeah, back at that point, I started to think, okay, once these standalone devices come out, that's really going to be the key to accessibility. And so I decided to shift focus entirely into building a scalable education platform at that point. And so here we are about 5 years later, and tested a ton of different pedagogical models, tested a ton of different development styles, and have landed on what we hope will become somewhat of like a standard model. I mean, I don't want to presume that we will develop the standard model, but something that's kind of template driven, something that is very scalable, something that makes it really accessible to build immersive courses. So that's really our mission, is to use these tools to make it really accessible and fast to build content. It shouldn't take months and months. It should take minutes or hours, and basically just build the world's biggest repository of interactive learning content that ideally is made free or as close to free as possible, so that in the next decade, this virtual world of education, Axon Park, will exist for people to go and learn whatever subject they want in whatever language and have these experiential learning moments. We can talk about the AI component as well, because that's a big piece of what we do. But it's really just about building that next generation platform, the same way we saw Coursera and Udemy and edX and all of these, you could say, Web 2.0 platforms come online. We're really trying to navigate and figure out what is the next generation of these platforms. So that's really what we're aiming to achieve.
I think that's fascinating. It always puzzled me when I would look at market analyses about the future of VR and where the big markets were. And of course, gaming and entertainment is always at the top of the heap. But then comes mental health. But when you look at these pie charts, education has just like a little sliver. And it just blows my mind, because to me, education should be the biggest market, because you have opportunities to be able to create experiences that intuitively engage the brain, engage a person in procedural learning, and make things that are hard to visualize very intuitive and understandable. With that in mind, is there a big market in this area? Do you have competitors? Do you feel you have a unique solution with this rapid authoring approach that makes your company kind of have a little bit of an edge right now?
So I think I'd love to just double click on the point about the surveys and the charts of where education is. I mean, so there was recently as in 2022, I just pulled it up just to refresh my memory here, but basically, I believe it was World Economic Forum that ran this with Ipsos. And I think it was something like 20,000 respondents from a ton of countries around the world. And they asked, how do you think the metaverse will influence your life in the future? What do you think will be the biggest impact? And when I opened this report, my jaw dropped with joy, because education was number one. So when you're actually asking the people, how do you think this will affect you? Education was number one. And then, of course, it was gaming. It was, productivity related things, retail, health being a huge one, mental health as well. So I do think that in the zeitgeist, you could say, there is this understanding that interactive immersive learning has a place in the future. And in terms of the competitive landscape for us, there are a ton of amazing VR education companies. There are a ton that have come before us that have been big inspirations to us. They're popping up every day. I think the thing that would sort of differentiate us and the niche in the market that we're trying to fill is we have also started supporting flat screens. So everything that we build is cross-platform. So you can jump in kind of like VR Chat or Rec Room, one of these platforms where any device you're on, you can get into the virtual space. You can be with other people in that space. handing items around, having spatial audio. But the area where we think that there's an opportunity and a big need, because realistically, the world isn't going to just jump from the traditional 2D LMS to full 3D. Like it's, maybe some people will attempt it and it will work for them. But in general, we believe that there's a transition period where we can make the learning management system feel relatively familiar and do all the things that a traditional learning management system can do, but then magically open up into an interactive 3D world that has all of the AI features, all of the social multiplayer features. So that's really our angle is, let's do all the baseline things that you'd expect from a traditional LMS. So you can run a traditional course, you can take your existing content, pop it on there, but then very rapidly use that content. Basically, just by uploading it to our platform, you can then immediately start to generate interactive modules to supplement that, to teach certain subjects, and to reinforce that learning, both in single player and multiplayer experiences. So we hope that in the long run, we can start to just take all the content that exists today, put it into the platform, start to generate immersive content, and then slowly start to shift into a fully immersive paradigm. But we also want to be realistic about how long that will take, which I know is probably, a topic of discussion here, but it could even be decade or decades, right? So we want to really bring this to people before, we're at that massive tipping point.
I think a lot of people tend to just, universally associate VR with headsets. And while certainly immersion is an important element for, depending on the application, but VR really has three eyes: immersion, interactivity, and imagination. And
Nice.
you can do some very compelling applications without immersion, but with this interactive component where the system is responsive, where it provides updates or tips or strategies where you can pause things. And now with the addition of AI, now you've got a whole another level of power here so that you can make highly interactive computer delivered applications that can be distributed worldwide. You don't have to own a headset. We're not at the point where I always like to say headsets are going to be like toasters. Every home will have one. You might not use it every day, but we're not quite there yet. Certainly, there's some experiences that really demand a headset, but with the integration of AI and this knowledge management system that I'm getting that you're working with, it just seems like there's tremendous opportunities to not be limited to one platform. And I think any company that is really looking to the future has to be cross-platform, but with attention to what are the interactive elements. Now, I mentioned AI. Tell us a little bit about your integration with AI and some of the applications that get developed and some of the user experiences.
Sure. So AI is a huge topic now, of course. I mean, there's a lot of hype around it, which we've tried to always sort of steer clear of the hype cycles. I mean, we kind of got lucky with the whole metaverse hype. Like we started in 2019, and then we had that big hype cycle during COVID for metaverse and all of that. But with AI, I mean, there's some real incredible utility from AI. So I'll just mention a couple of the things that we're doing from a high level. So one would be developing what we call a knowledge graph. So the system gets to know what the user struggles with and what they know well. So we have this fun phrase internally where we say, the old adage where you say, oh, you don't know what you don't know, right? Well, after a month in Axon Park, we know what you don't know and we can help you, right? And I think that's actually a very almost philosophical, fundamental shift in how humans will interact with technology and with educational technology. And it's actually very interesting to think about, like in the future, 10 years, 20 years, let's say, where people grow up with an AI assistant that knows exactly what they don't know about a subject and can support them. Imagine losing that. Imagine just floating, in the darkness with no idea of what you don't know. I mean, it's a very interesting philosophical dilemma that might be something that people don't even realize that is essential to them yet. So that's going to be fun to sort of see how that plays out. On top of that, there's some really practical applications. So, for example, you could upload a chapter from a textbook. Our system will churn through it. It will classify the information. It will tell you these are the subjects, the topics, and the concepts contained in this information. Is this correct? You say yes. So you get that human approval, which is very important right now. And then now you have an intelligent material, and you can use that intelligent material to develop immersive modules, develop review games, develop quizzes, develop discussion modules, etc. So you basically take the paradigm of source knowledge, which can then be processed and then transmuted essentially into different experiences. And what's beautiful about that is it can be uploaded in Japanese and taught in French, right? It doesn't matter, the source. It's just really profound in terms of accessibility for language and things like that. There are other fun things. Of course, you've got your NPCs, our, lead AI engineer. She just absolutely loves coming up with personalities for Axon. So Axon is our AI tutor and sort of the AI companion that floats around in the world with you that you can call up and chat with. And yeah, you can have all these fun personalities for the AI that you can basically receive real-time feedback. You can ask them for support, ask them to generate a custom review lesson based on your weaknesses, things like that. Those are just a few tastes. I mean, there's a lot of stuff underneath the surface as well. I mean, one thing that is so exciting to me long term, and I don't think we're that far away as an industry, is to basically be standing in like a matrix style, white room, you could imagine. And, maybe you're wearing a headset at this point. You say, today I want to learn about volcanoes. Like I want to see what it's like in the middle of a volcano. And then it just builds the volcano around you, right? So now you're standing inside of a volcano. You have this procedural generation of worlds, kind of holodeck style. And there are some really amazing new tools that are generating 3D models very quickly now, just based on text prompts or based on reference imagery. And that's something that I think will be just tremendous, is that future.
I just did an application by a company, Sept, where it's still text generated, where I went into a headset and I generated, I want a Ukrainian battlefield in a forest area with artillery. And it took about 30 seconds, and all of a sudden it generated a spherical image. And the backdrop was great. The trenches were all there. The only flaw was that the piece of artillery looked like a porcupine. It was like a tank body with about 15 turrets sticking out all over the place. But that's for now. I mean, this stuff, to be able to generate content on the fly with a few verbal prompts is going to revolutionize what we can do here. And as you mentioned, taking a chapter, I also tried an app that a graduate student had produced, and this was at that conference I was telling you I went to in Prague, the ICD VRT event, and he had uploaded into a RAG layer to interact with ChatGPT, I don't half understand these terms, but it stands for Retrieval Augmented Generation. And he inserted in 5 textbooks by Carl Rogers. And then I could interact with the AI and ask any question that would generate a very convincing, credible set of responses in the words of Carl Rogers. And it harkened back to the original ELIZA application from 1997 with Weizenbaum's work doing that as an example with non-directive, the Carl Rogers type non-directive therapy. And he was appalled that his secretary, when interacting with it, took it so seriously, and it made him question the use of AI. But in this case, I had a dialogue with this AI for about 10, 15 minutes, and it remembered the questions I had asked and the interactions I had had previously and integrated that into our discussion with further questions. So it was developing a model of what I was interested in and putting that context into the later responses. And it was like, and this was a graduate student doing this. And it's like, this is really the future. Now, I see this as a massive productivity tool. um, rapid generation of content and high level of interactivity. And once you, as you said, you do the vetting, you approve the content, because we know, just like the tank with all the turrets, it hallucinates periodically. But if you implement these sort of guardrail approaches to this stuff, you have a tremendous opportunity. So that leads us to, what are the role of human teachers? What are the ethics around it? But let's just talk about, because this comes up in psychology all the time. I did a talk last week where, a bunch of psychologists, and I said, look, this AI is coming, and how do we use it professionally and ethically for providing some level of patient support? What does this do in education? It's obviously going to transform the role of the teacher, the human teacher. I don't think well, I don't want to answer the question for you. What's your view on having seen all this in action?
Yeah. Yeah, I appreciate you bringing that up because it is a big question. I mean, in the big picture, it's like, what is the role of the human period with AI, right? But I think for education, when we've spoken with teachers right now, they are buried in tedious work. They're buried in grading. They're buried in putting together the lesson plans. They're buried in so much administrative work that they're burned out. They don't have enough time. Oftentimes they're not paid for the overtime.
Right.
And it's just a tool, I think, in the immediate term, I think it's just really a tool to streamline the administrative work for them in a big way. Because right now it's just, you hear about the teacher burnout, right? It's a real thing. So I think first and foremost, that is a big thing that we're working on with teachers, is to just help them lighten the load. In the longer term, the mission for us as a company is to empower teachers to actually focus on the inspiring part of teaching, connecting with students, connecting them with each other, helping them discover things about themselves, rather than just pure raw like information delivery. Because ultimately, the information exists, and whatever source of truth, whether that's a textbook, and then it's the job of the teacher to transfer that knowledge to the student. And sometimes for different students, they prefer different modalities of learning. So ultimately, I see AI being a very powerful tool to reduce the administrative overhead, provide a ton of new ways for the students to interact with the content, to get real-time feedback. I mean, do you imagine sitting there doing your homework with, pen and pencil, and you have no idea if what you're doing is right or wrong. And unless you're very privileged and you have access to a tutor, you have access to someone who can support you, then you're just sitting there sort of twiddling your thumbs, not knowing if what you're doing is correct. And I know there's a big debate around this, whether it's better to kind of struggle through the pain of learning. But for me personally, if I can get unstuck and I can learn, like if you actively take the stance of trying to learn when you get stuck and using the tools to build that knowledge, then now you know the solution, you can keep moving forward, right? You, instead of getting stuck on something, like for me with programming, if I'm stuck on a programming challenge for 2 days straight versus using the AI and it just says, hey, you might want to check this out, and in 5 minutes I know the solution, that's better in my opinion, right? So I think that's where teachers and new technology will kind of flourish together. And I really would hope that the AI will not replace teachers. It will just basically supercharge their capabilities and make their jobs a lot more enjoyable and less focused on the little administrative tasks.
Yeah, I think you've hit a couple of key points there. I think the affective element of learning is really key. I think pain is overrated as a motivational driver for continued education. When you can put a child in an environment where if they have a problem, they don't have to start thinking, oh, I'm dumb. Oh, I should have paid better attention in class, or even worse, having a scolding teacher that when you ask a question, they say, well, Mr. Rizzo, if you paid attention in class, you would have been able to answer that question. So to have a way to maintain inspiration in a new learner, whether it's a child or an adult, A very powerful attribute. And that's why when you were mentioning about the different personalities that the Axon entity would have, that would be tailored to what, the person's nature, so that you can maintain a positive motivation. I think we always said, oh yeah, no pain, no gain, you got to suffer through the hard times. Life will give you plenty of hard times to suffer through in everyday life. You don't need to codify pain as a way to promote motivation and educational attainment. And so I see this really as powerful direction to go in, as long as we got to keep in mind, we're providing decision support. We're not doing complete decision making. We're a kid interacting in an environment, in a learning environment, being monitored and checked and having the AI. Well, that teacher can get a report on that and then tailor their in-person content around things that would be unknown to that teacher without that information.
Yeah, oh, sorry to interrupt. It's just, you're reminding me of an interesting study that I came across recently, where basically they showed students, I believe they were high school students, and they tracked the dropout rate, and then they introduced LLMs, and they basically said, here's access to an LLM, use this for all your schoolwork to your heart's content, just disclose to us, when it's been used. And the most profound difference was not actually the jump in the grade point average. Like, it wasn't going from a C to a B to an A. It was actually the decrease in the dropout rate. So again, I think, like, you nailed it on the head, right? The students are being scolded. There's microaggressions happening in the class from the teacher, from the other students. They're feeling burnt out. They're feeling dumb. They're feeling like they can't do it. But when they have this tool that gets them unstuck, it really transforms their level of comfort and psychological safety in the classes. And so I think that's actually what people should focus on, is really like, let's reduce the dropout rates. Let's increase the overall engagement. And then the sort of bell curve will fix itself in terms of grading. And it's really not even having that big of an impact on the grades.
What about teachers? When you show them this, or you describe it, do you get pushback? I mean, I know in the psychology area, certainly there was a lot of pushback in the beginning for using technology, because I think old school clinicians felt threatened and felt like they were going to be replaced and all that. And not just AI, but using VR even in the very simplest of applications. And I see a fundamental difference now. There's more of an active curiosity, maybe because a lot of the people I interact with are younger folks that are coming up, and they grew up with technology, so they're not as threatened, and they see it as a tool. What about educational folks that you work with? Do you have a hard sell, or do they say, thank God for this, please give me more?
So I'll be very honest with you. I mean, some of the demos that we've built in the early days, when we look at the teacher on the other end of the Zoom meeting, their face would just go white, and the one in particular was, early we were prototyping the system where basically, and this is like back over a year ago now, where you could talk to Axon, and we'd used a demo of a solar system lesson, and you'd be standing in this beautiful space that our lead designer Taja had created, and you'd basically be taking a class on the solar system, and you'd start with all the planets with the sun in the middle, and then Axon would say, all right, what would you like to learn about first? And in this demo we say, I'd like to learn about Mercury, and then the system would basically despawn the whole solar system, and it would spawn the Mercury model, and it would start explaining Mercury to you. And then you'd say, now, before you tell me more, let's switch to Italian. And then it would switch to Italian, and you could chat in Italian, and then switch back to English. And then one that was really interesting was, let's use a metaphor based on chemistry to teach me about the solar system. And it came up with a metaphor. And seeing just the direct teaching, I think was actually, it was potentially terrifying for some educators. And I can understand that position. But I think what we learned from that is that the system, it's not quite there yet to be able to really do that. And without the teacher, without the human element, we're all like techno optimists to the max. So, when we look at this, it's like without the human element, it really loses that container. It loses that warm element that really promotes the long-term learning. And so we've seen it on both sides, right? The fear of seeing, wow, this thing can teach in any language. It knows every subject. It can spawn a 3D model in a virtual world to demonstrate its point. What's the role of the teacher? But I still really strongly feel that teachers are going to still be essential for the future, for full development of students. I think once students kind of get to the later years, maybe if they're doing, professional education, more lifelong learning type education, sure, they can directly work with an AI. They've built the social emotional skills. They've built the framework of how to think about the world. But especially in the younger years, without the human element, I think I don't want to see a civilization that's basically raised by AI tutors. I mean, I think it would be a very scary, hollow world. So I do really think that human element is important for those formative years, especially.
I think that speaks to the issue of the future. As much as it is building the applications, it's also building out training tools for teachers to teach them how to optimally use the power of these technologies to do a better job. Because teachers are just like doctors. When you ask doctors what you would want to see improve, I want to produce better outcomes. I want to be able to see more patients, and I want to make more money.
Yeah.
In the end, but they haven't. The first thing that comes up is they want to produce better outcomes, and teachers are the same thing. They want to. I mean, they go into the field because they want to inspire and engage people. So teaching them how to use this as a productivity tool and to be able to leverage it so that in those strategic moments where they have the time. They're not doing that mundane, repetitive stuff. I mean, they'll do some of it in certain cases, but they have the time to put an individual focus and give a kid human attention. It's going to transform the role of the teacher from a lot of drudge to something that is an inspirational figure. And a lot of times learning doesn't happen. The content of learning isn't in a vacuum. There's values involved, and there's ways that you take learning in one area and you transform it into learning and to some knowledge generated about social interaction or ethics of problem solving and so on. And I think that's really where you can make it so teachers do what they do really well all the time. Just fascinating topic here. Okay, well, let's see. We've got about 5 to 10 minutes left, and I've only gotten through like 4 of the questions I wanted to ask you. 5 minutes until Q&A, I just got a message. Okay. I have one question I ask everybody. We'll save that for the very end when we're over time. What do you see as the biggest challenges in your day-to-day work? How do you keep a business afloat? You're obviously a visionary. You've got the intellectual capability, technical skills. What are the challenges to go from having a great idea and starting a company to making it generate revenue, be self-sustaining, evolving and growing? What do you see from your experience that you could share with other visionaries? And trust me, anybody who's interested in VR and really wants to put the effort into building out a company that delivers it is a visionary. So what's your tip to other visionaries, or what's your challenges?
Yeah, I mean, the visionary word is funny. I feel like I fell backwards into VR. Like once I saw it, I just couldn't unsee it. It's like, this is just amazing, I think in terms of building a company, there are definitely so many components. I think some things that are just a real challenge would be getting to the point where you have product market fit, right? You have so many assumptions at the beginning. You have your, maybe a few people tried it and they loved something, and then that set you on a path saying, people love this. But in reality, it's such a small sample size that you don't truly know that you have something that's going to work. So there's this really interesting dilemma when you're building a product, especially a technology product, where the process of discovery of whether or not people actually care about the features and whether or not people will actually use them in the way that you'd anticipate, and the dance between rapid prototyping, knowing that you're going to have to throw everything away, versus building scalable infrastructure, it's a really difficult challenge. And it's something that I don't think there's a simple answer for. I mean, there are a ton of frameworks out there that have been developed to try to discover this, and famous books like the lean startup and all these concepts around how to do this. But I do think that that's kind of an underrated challenge, to really have the discipline to go through that feedback loop, and actually have the right controls in place and the right sample size and the right demographics, to really do that effectively. I think building company culture is essential, and how so many little elements play into building culture, and how basically one person can influence an entire culture, and how tiny micro actions really add up to that. And I mean, avoiding burnout, like, knowing when it's too much for the team, when it's not enough, making sure that the vision is really clear for them, the deliverables are clear. I think that is also essential and a big component. And then one that, again, for me, part of my mission with education is to teach people about finance, because it's just never taught really in school. And it's so important. Like, when I started to self-study finance is when my entire life changed. It's like, it's when I actually felt in control. I mean, I've heard people say it's the language of business, and I really agree with that in a big way. It's like, really studying finance if you're going to have a company. I mean, there's a lot of other things. I know we're quite pressed on time here, so I'll just leave it at those three.
Yeah. Well, certainly it's a world that's different from the world I grew up in my career as an academic. You have an idea, you cobble together some resources, get a grant, hire some students, build something, run a study, publish a paper. All right, what's the next thing? And from that, you know, cycle to now I'm doing more work in private industry. I'm really seeing how the knowledge base of an academic is not necessarily the knowledge base for productization or helping a company to thrive. I can weigh in on the science, but I don't really fully understand. I'm learning as I go. I'm making a lot of mistakes that I learn from, but it's really a challenge. And I admire people that know how to do that. But I think, maybe the integration of the academic with the business expert, maybe that's the ideal solution, I hope. Anyway, all right, we got a couple more minutes. Well, we're at the end. Let me ask one last question I ask everybody. If you had 2 years and unlimited resources to create any type of VR, AR, XR application, what would it be? And have you already done it? Is it what you're already doing?
I mean, I feel really blessed that I can actually say that what I'm building would be that application. I mean, I think if I had unlimited resources and I could just build an enormous team and we, could really get after it, I think that'd be very useful and amazing. But yeah, I think it's a long game as well. I mean, 2 years is, as well, better than pretty much anyone on the planet. 2 years in VR land is like just a little piece of hair sprouting out of the head. It's like so I think, yeah, I think more like 20 years, maybe 20 years and unlimited resources. Hopefully we'd be able to get there, but still maybe not even to the full goal. So
cool. Okay, Sherry.
Okay, well, thank you so much. I wanted to now open it up for some questions and answers. As a reminder, participants joining from the webinar can directly ask a question through the Q&A window, while participants from the YouTube live stream can also ask questions in the live chat. And I do have one question here in the Q&A that says, are you seeing opportunities to teach subjects or skills in VR that were challenging or impossible to effectively convey through traditional educational methods? I think you may have covered on a bit of this, but maybe if you can add any additional.
Sure, yeah, I can jump into this. Thank you, Phil, for the question. Um, so I'll tackle this from two directions. One thing that we learned early on as we started to build was that building hands-on simulations like fine motor skill simulations are really challenging, and they often cause more problems than they solve, especially if people are new VR users. I think there's some really incredible work for surgical simulation that's sort of breaking that barrier, but for general use, fine motor skills like how to perform a lumbar puncture or, insert an IV or, phlebotomy, things like that. I think those things are tremendously challenging to do well, where the technology can kind of just get in the way of the learning in a sense. I think we'll move beyond that as we have higher fidelity input. In terms of things that are impossible to effectively convey, I mean, one thing that I just absolutely love about VR is the ability to change your perspective. So you can actually step into the anterior descending artery in the heart to understand a heart attack. You can actually go into a cosmic scale to start learning about quantum mechanics, for example. So it's basically being able to change your perspective and shift where you see the world. The vantage point from which you see the world is impossible to do without these types of technologies. So yeah, that's just one that immediately comes to mind. Thank you for the question.
Yeah,
I
thank
concur
you.
with this because I really think that, we are highly visual learners. And some people have an ability to visualize the unseen world. Um, I don't think I was one of those people. I think I needed more and more help, and I could learn to do it. But with VR as a visualization tool, like you're saying, from different perspectives or going into an artery or into a molecule, and putting in some kind of a procedural activity that would I I think overcoming the concreteness of traditional learning, by giving the superpower of visualization, and interactivity, trial and error learning, doing the what if scenarios. What if I inject saline into the cell? What's going to happen? And seeing it happen, and maybe with some voice describing a process. And, well, I don't understand that process. Well, let's drill down a little further, and just opening up that capacity. I think this is where the work you're doing has really a lot of power.
Thank you. Thank you both for that. I kind of, Taylor, I want to ask you a question. This is getting kind of into you're building the company. You've really accomplished so much so early. Can you tell me what role have mentors played in your success?
I mean, mentors, I think, play such a role that are like implicit and also obvious. I think there's just seeing people early in my life, like looking up to entrepreneurs that I admire and just knowing, hey, if they can do it, maybe I can do it. Right. So, like, I think there's sort of this inherent role model mentality where like the mentor just serves as a mentor just by the simple fact that they exist and that they accomplished a goal. And then, I mean, there have been so many amazing people in my life. I mean, Skip being one of them. Skip has been super inspiring to me, honestly. I mean, someone who's
Thank you.
dedicated their life to this craft has, made breakthroughs, has, really innovated and pioneered a new sector. I know a mutual friend of ours, Jackie Mori, is another one. I had the pleasure
Yeah.
of working with Jackie for some years, and, just so incredibly inspiring. And I think, there's micro mentorship from a lot of people. Like I could name a ton of people who I'd say like these are my full-on mentors, right? Skip and Jackie being, in that category. But then looking at someone who just maybe says one or two things at a meeting, and I can see myself, wow, you know what? Like maybe if I work hard enough, maybe if I learn enough, I can attain that level of skill. And I think with mentorship, seeing people who look like you is actually a very important thing, which is why I think, having diverse representation in leadership roles is so important for people to feel inspired and to feel like it's possible. Because, for me growing up, it was people like Richard Branson, whereas like, okay, I kind of look like this guy, we're kind of similar, but I could imagine not having those types of mentors or, role models to look up to. And think there's also a lot of research around this as well. So yeah, I mean, that's kind of how I would think about mentors. I mean, there's way too many to even list here.
So what were, what was your greatest challenge or your greatest challenges in starting Axon Park?
Um, I'd say again, like questioning all of the assumptions, just getting checked time and time again to say people don't give a beep about that feature. They just don't care, right? And you invest so much time and you're so certain and you're so convinced, and then you roll it out and people don't even notice that feature, right? So I think it's kind of the discipline of going through that feedback loop. And it's still something I'm working on. I've not even come close to perfecting that, but I'd say that's a big piece. Of course, finding the right talent is a big challenge. Finding the right capital is a big challenge. Um, Finding good branding is a challenge. There's so many things that play into it. But I think just again, sort of the old adage of like you have to love what you do and like be willing to go through the tough times, because inherently it's going to get very tough, and to just actually resonate with the big picture and just like be working towards something bigger than yourself. I mean, in my case, I feel very grateful that I found VR and that I just have this inherent motivation and passion to do this. Like, I feel like I have to do it for whatever reason. And I've tried to figure out why. I couldn't tell you why, to be honest. I just love it and I feel like I have to do it. And I think a lot of people, unfortunately, don't find that feeling. So yeah, I'm very grateful for that. But it comes with a lot of struggle and pain, and doing things that you don't want to do and pushing through. But yeah, I think that's just entrepreneurship in a nutshell. I mean, it's life in a nutshell as well, but especially entrepreneurship.
Yeah. So would that be your advice that you give to new creators or entrepreneurs out there starting, especially a business in immersive tech, that you have to really have that inner drive in order to move forward and make it work?
I mean, I think people start businesses for different reasons, and I can admire a lot of these different reasons. I mean, for me, sometimes I feel like my passion for VR blinds me from good ideas, from ideas that would actually be bigger and help more people. And one example of that is like I refused to move to flat screens for years. I was like, oh yeah, they went to flat screen. They're not hardcore VR people. Like
Yeah.
we're all in on VR. And then finally, after just so many people saying, you need to have a flat screen version, you know, finally it was like, okay, I'll do it. And since we did that, like it has just unlocked so many opportunities. So with that said, I think some people, start businesses where, it's just a couple of smart people and they say, we want to start a business. What problem can we solve? And our goal is just to build a successful business. It doesn't matter what industry it's in. I also think that's very viable. I think the tough times are harder to get through in that scenario. But I've seen a ton of people and read about a ton of people that have taken that approach, and it's really delivered a lot of value to the world. So yeah, it's tricky, like just as long as you have a strong motivation, like if your motivation is just to make money, then I don't think that's enough. I mean, for some people, maybe it is.
Maybe
But
it is, but it's a brittle motivation. If
Right.
you're not successful, it's easy to break. And all right, then you move on.
Yeah, you
But
just
having
switch
that inner
businesses.
drive that you're talking about, same here, brother.
Yeah, we're lucky. I mean, we're lucky ones to be
Oh
able to have
man,
had that. So
95% of the world population probably wakes up in the morning and dreads going to work. I thank God or entity above, whatever, that's not me. I'm in that 5%, where every day, yeah, like you say, it's not easy. It's a friggin' challenge, but um, you have a boundless motivation to take on those challenges because it gives you personal meaning. And I ask this question a lot with people that are in the field, because I think we're a unique kind of a group. We're the creators of experiences, or looking for more efficient ways of doing something, or I don't know what it is, but there's a boundless fountain of motivation that comes from the work. Um, yeah, and
Yeah, I
that's
love
very
that.
powerful to keep you going.
Yeah. So Taylor, do you have any last thoughts for the viewers? Just taking a minute that you'd like to share?
I mean, I think we've covered a lot of great stuff today. I guess if the viewers out there are, thinking about starting something of their own in the space, again, just start to rapid prototype. Don't get too attached to your own ideas. Try to prove to yourself and to people that you're wrong, right? I think that's a good one, right? Like, try to prove that your ideas are wrong. And if you can't prove that they're wrong because they're so good and people are saying, nope, I need this, I want this, I actually do, then you're onto something. So I'd say for the people that are out there who are, professionals who want to start implementing these technologies within their own practice, not necessarily starting a company, but implementing, don't be scared to just take the first step, just get serious about doing something, reach out to, a lot of these companies, the startups are very accessible. The founders will respond to you. If you say, I'm really passionate about this, I'm curious to get your advice, would you be open to letting me try the software? Would you have a quick chat with me? I think people are, as Skip said, this industry really attracts people who are very passionate and open-minded and want to help others. So yeah, just not being afraid to just start. Like, we all go into this thinking we know more than we really do and quickly realizing that we don't. And like, if you wait forever to feel like you're prepared, it'll never happen. So just get it going and like study, follow the trends, follow the news, make sure that you know what headsets are out there, what software is coming out, big moves of the big players. And eventually you'll find that thing that clicks.
How can people find you, Taylor? The website, we'll put a link in the chat or wherever for the episode for your website. But what you on typical social media and stuff like that, or?
Yeah, I mean, I've admittedly sort of slowed down my use of socials, like deleted some of the apps from my phone and stuff like that, just because I was in a dopamine cycle.
Yeah, right.
I'd say, if it's a professional inquiry, I'm on LinkedIn. You can find me, there very easily. And then, yeah, you can reach out through the company as well if you're interested. I mean, again, what we're trying to provide as a company is an education platform. So if you're looking to teach anything, we want to support you in that mission and enable this sort of interactive 3D world as well as any traditional content that you might have. So on that front, always feel free to reach out. But yeah, I'd say probably LinkedIn is the best place. And I believe it's just like linkedin.in/Taylor P. Freeman. So
we can add that to the to this before we post it. So that'd be great. Anyway, well, thank you so much. Once again, thank you to everyone who joined this episode of Immersive Tech Talk. I hope you've learned from our amazing guest today. I certainly have. It's been great. So thank you, Taylor, and thank you again to our incredible host, Skip Rizzo. For our audience, the video recordings of this event will be available on our YouTube channel, so please feel free to share it with anyone who might be interested in the topic. We look forward to seeing you again at our next event and hope you have a wonderful rest of your day. Thanks again.
Thank you, Skip. Thank you, Sherry.
Thank you, brother.
Take care, everyone.